The UN is at it again, of course, while people in China are being oppressed, while Russia is killing people in another nation as well as its own nation, while multiple genocides are going out across the world, as well as actual starvations. UN cares about the human rights abuses by the British government because this is something that matters to them. They really need to talk about, specifically talking about the recent events when it comes to proscribing the Palestine action in the United Kingdom as a terrorist organization, and the human rights chief is calling this move disproportionate and unnecessary. Is talking about the limits, about the rights and freedoms of people in the UK. So, welcome to the Daily Objective. This is what we'll discuss today. Joining me today is James Valiant, and I'll go to you, James, in just a bit. But I'll just again mention about Palestine Action. It's an organization that has focused on sort of protesting, and I'm putting this in big quotes, against sort of UK cooperation with Israel, and that included basically breaking into an Royal Air Force base, basically damaging a plane upwards of millions of pounds of cost of repair, and has openly the organization. It's not just some rogue members of this organization itself has openly supported these acts and is actively encouraging these acts. So it's actively calling for violence, is actively calling for basically political change through violent means. Now, I think there is a word for an organization that does such things. James, any opening thoughts from you?
Well, if the organization itself participates, and let's put advocacy to one side, because it says in the very name, action is in Palestinian action. Okay, what they're there's words and then there's actions, and if those actions violate people's rights, or those actions break windows, set fires, block streets, actually incite violence. If those actions mean breaking into a military base and damaging and defacing an aircraft, then it's not free speech. Obviously, it has nothing to do with free speech. It has to do with your right to hurt other people, damage their property, intimidate them, threaten them with violence. Now, if that's what you mean by protest, that's not free speech. That's not free expression. What that's saying is that everyone has a right to throw rocks at each other. That has nothing to do with free speech, and we set that aside. Freedom of expression does not include violence, the giving aid and comfort to violence, and or violating people's rights in that direct way. That would pit rights against one another, your rights versus my rights, and so forth. That is logically inconsistent. And I will cite, again, Ayn Rand's brilliant articles, Man's Rights and the Nature of Government, which you can find in The Virtue of Selfishness. She clearly defines what are rights. If your right to protest means the right to do harm to someone else or their property, or to incite violence, then you have crossed the line between any kind of free speech and real right and into criminal activity. Um, Using violence and intimidation to change the policy of your government, that is criminal activity. Now, insofar as this Palestinian Action Group has been designated a terrorist group, to be a part of it is to be part of a group that advocates, supports. I mean, and if you're giving material support to that group, then you're part of their criminal activities. Um, Now, I'd be very careful, and I'm not sure British law is careful to distinguish between free speech and, the correct scope of that free speech. But in any case, Britain is among the freest nations on the earth. That is to say, free speech is much, much more broadly protected in Great Britain than some of the nations you mentioned, China, Russia, Iran. We could go down a whole list of countries where free speech is comparatively non-existent. What about the protests against women disappearing because they don't wear the hijab properly in Iran? for example. Where is the outrage there? You make a really good point. The UN and its understanding of what rights are is utterly illegitimate. Just because you get a majority of the dictatorships in the world to agree that this is a violation of rights, then it is a perverse moral claim. They're using it as a moral claim. That is to say, a Human Rights Council from the United Nations, which is itself a joke, has no moral authority. I mean, I think we at the Ayn Rand Center UK, we really ought to have our own Human Rights Council and start denouncing what properly should be denounced. But what is international law? What authority would we have? We're not a governmental organization. We're not even an international body like that. But if we did, we would have at least as much moral legitimacy as the UN Human Rights Council. In fact, more, because we would be advocating for a proper conception of what rights are. Now, if you belong to a group that advocates violence and engages in criminal activity, and you're supporting that group, and the police come knocking on your door, and I don't care who you are, they have a right to investigate that. That is not overkill. Now, if they were to haul someone off for truly just advocating something, that doesn't cause immediate rights violations to someone else, I would say that is crossing the line. But the last people in the world I would trust on what is a violation of free speech is the UN Human Rights Council. The UN Human Rights Council looks aside at from the worst rights violations in the world, and they're zeroing in on the United Kingdom, one of the freest, most liberal countries in the world in this respect. That's pretty outrageous. But Britain is now at least feeling what it is to uh, have anything to do with opposing Palestinian violence and trying to fight back on those who are fighting it and confronting the United Nations. So let Great Britain now, like Mr. Netanyahu, understand exactly how legitimate the UN is. The United Kingdom, yes, you're next up. Well, you're a civilized country like Israel is. And so, of course, you and Israel have to be the focus of the United Nations ire because they can't bother their time. They can't waste their time, complaining about Iran or China or Russia or North Korea. No, 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 no. Or if some genocide is happening somewhere in the world, some real, like you point out, real use of hunger and starvation to kill a people, or the real slaughter of people in great numbers for intentional purposes. No, no. And these people that redefine what genocide is, well, Great Britain, welcome to the party of United Nations moral corruption and perversity. Not as though you haven't teed it up yourselves. No, what the civilized nations of the world have to do is reject the United Nations as any kind of moral authority or any kind of authority on what rights are, because they're obviously just the opposite. The United Nations has been basically, as I've put it many times, a dictatorship and terrorism protection racket for many decades. And insofar as anyone gives them the time of day or for being a moral authority, they're mistaken. This stuff is wielded because what? The international community has agreed to this committee being there. And so this committee's pronouncements have some greater authority than anything you and I might say, Daniel. That is utterly absurd on the face of it. They are no more legitimate than anything you and I might say. They're less legitimate if we're correct about what rights really mean. United Kingdom, welcome to the party. Of course, you're a horrible rights violating dictatorship, don't you know? Along with Israel and Netanyahu. Welcome to the party, Great Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of, I guess there's two ways we can. Well, first we can talk about the sort of the UN focus on the human rights abuses, right? If I just checked with ChatGPT just to confirm, but I believe this is true, that basically both in 2023 and 2022, there were 17 resolutions against Israel and 6 resolutions against the rest of the world. And in 2022, there were 15 against Israel and 13 against the rest of the world. So again, this focus on not only just Israel, not only it's not only anti-Semitism. Generally, this focus on Western nations now against the UK, right, is so the UN Human Rights Commissioner talks about how proscribing Palestine Action as a terrorist organization is disproportionate and unnecessary. The fact is that there is an organization that is actively promoting breaking the law in the UK. Again, Palestine Action was not the only organization that has this prescription. Even within the same sort of like when it was being passed through the British Parliament, two more sort of right-wing organizations were also proscribed as terrorist organizations at the same time. But again, they only focus on Palestine Action. They only focus on the one that is sort of in their interest or sort of in their what they like. And I want to also cover this them again talking about rights. UN talking about rights, it's like listening to libertarians talk about rights. Like they have no conception of where it came from. Basically, they just found it on the ground someday and suddenly imagine, okay, this must be true. They didn't find it on the ground. They stole it from people. It's a stolen concept from them. They stole it from people who actually understand what rights are, what individual rights are, and are just simply taking it and putting it as okay, we just start with that. We just start with, they call it human rights. We just start with that. And if we go by that, it's everything perfect. But they have no understanding what is the purpose of rights. They have no understanding how to even apply them. Again, now they are talking about if you cannot go and break law, if you cannot support an organization that is actively promoting violence against both the government and people, that is somehow a violation of your human rights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It will be like saying that the mafia in my country, organized crime in my country, the law going after them is a violation of their rights. Well, of course, that's absurd, but that's literally the comparison here. So, an organization that engages in criminal activity and advocates criminal activity it's disproportionate to put them on the terrorist group, prescribed criminal or terrorist organizations list. Well, that's crazy. Yeah, and they've stolen. This is really a very interesting double meaning to the term stolen concept, isn't it? Because what they do is they steal the idea of classical liberalism, the idea of John Locke and Thomas Jefferson about what rights actually consist of. They've stolen it because it had moral authority. And what are they using it for? Simply to claim that their position has moral authority. Now, they don't, that allows them to avoid making actually an ethical or moral argument about what it is to violate other people's rights. See, it's a right to violate other people's rights. It's a right to throw stones. And I don't care if they're a right-wing group or a pro-Palestinian group. They don't have a right to throw rocks, set fires, damage people's property, threaten people, incite violence. When you do that, you've crossed the line. That's what government is for, is to protect citizens from violence and threats and property damage. And groups that engage in that are not engaged in it. They're not exercising their rights. When we understand the term rights, you know, the concept of rights properly understood, it is not that at all. They're doing the exact opposite. They're saying you have a right to violate other people's rights, and an organization that advocates and engages in the violation of other people's rights, it has rights. Well, that's a contradiction on the face of it. And they're doing that simply, and see, they need the authority. It's an argument. Logically, it's the fallacious argument from authority. Because we're the UN Human Rights Council, because we call it rights, or because we call something genocide, or because we call something whatever else we want, apartheid or whatever else it is, evil. Let's just use the word, a blanket, smushy term, because they've turned all these words into meaningless terms. So we think what you're doing is evil when you're trying to stop an organization that's engaged in criminal activity. Okay. It's criminal activity for some people you like, right? Yeah, the Palestinian cause. Yeah, the UN is anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Western, anti-civilization. That's what they exist for. And civilized nations should recognize that and get the hell out. These people are on purpose perverting moral concepts like rights to their own ends, claiming the moral high ground through sheer argument from authority. Well, the nations of the world voted on this, or this is the UN Human Rights Council. They call it rights. No, no. What that calls for, ladies and gentlemen, for us to open reopen the book on what it is to have an individual right. What does the concept of rights mean? And it does not mean the ability to throw rocks, set fires, damage RAF aircraft. No, that cannot be what rights include. And until and unless we politically belly up to the bar and define what we mean by rights, they're just using so much noise. They're just emitting noise to create an emotional reaction using the logical fallacy of argument from authority.
And so mentioning just one more thing. Well, first we have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. This guy, this UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk, has also, or I guess it would be Turk, has also talked about Israel. He said that if intent were proven, Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, which would amount to a war crime. And he was, of course, criticized for it. He also said the current trajectory of escalating conflict and blatant disregard for international human rights and humanitarian law is indefensible. And again, so you have somebody who is supposed to have an authority, and he uses that authority to basically bash a free country or a relatively free country. No, a free country in the region. I'm not gonna compromise on that. A free country in Middle East that is simply defending itself, is simply defending its citizens against a bunch of dictatorships that are trying to wipe it out, and is criticizing the free nation for it.
Well, consider what he's saying there. You have to feed your enemy. You're engaged, you were attacked, you're engaged in a legitimate war of self-defense, and if you don't feed the enemy population, you're engaged in a human rights violation. If you don't feed the tools of the dictatorship and the populace, whether they agree with the dictator or not, the populace become tools of that aggressive dictatorship. And so if you don't feed them and help your enemy, imagine, and we've said this before, and I'll say it again. So that's to say, Britain and the United States needed to feed Nazi Germany, needed to feed the German people, or it was a human rights violation? No. Cutting off supplies is not during a legitimate war, is not a violation of war crimes. It's not a violation of human rights. No, you don't owe, first of all, you don't owe anyone any food, right? If they're engaged in war with you, you have a right to cut them off. And so what they would, I guess, call a human rights violation, I would call sane warfare, the rational protection of your rights. And the moral status of the population, any individual in the population, is simply irrelevant. They are instruments of the war. Now, look at the facts, though, the reality here. Actually, Netanyahu is busy feeding that doing the very thing that I said he has no obligation to do. In fact, good sound warfare would tell him, don't feed the enemy population. Bring them to their knees as soon as possible, for everybody's sake, to end this war as quickly as possible. But no, no, no. Netanyahu and America and the West are busy trying to feed a population from an enemy organization that started a war back on October 7th, 2023. This is sick, twisted, perverted, has nothing to do with human rights, has nothing to do with war crimes. They've got it exactly backwards. But on the other hand, they have also got the facts wrong. If only Netanyahu were doing that, if only Israel were doing that. No, and so similarly, if you're twisted in your view of what rights are, you'd think that an organization that goes out and damages RAF aircraft, breaking onto military facilities, or starts fires, throws rocks, incites violence, well, that's just free speech. They have a right to do that. That's disproportionate if you go after anyone who might be materially supporting such an organization. No, they're a criminal organization. If they are in fact a criminal organization engaging in and inciting crime, then the people who are involved in that should be investigated by the government. Um, this is taking moral perversion. But what can you expect? The United Nations itself is a giant moral perversion. Anything that comes out of its mouth as some kind of moral statement of legitimacy is almost inevitably going to be a perversion of the concept of rights, morality itself. They defend dictatorships. I mean, that for them, that's what the right of self-determination means. You can run a theocracy that can kill women in prison, disappear people in jails, kill your political opponents like Putin does, engage in all the horrors that China is doing against the Uyghurs. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's not the main. Why should that be our focus? Why should you pointed out the number of resolutions? Why should that be the focus of 16 different resolutions? Uh, no, they're an organization designed to violate rights and to give moral cover for the violation of rights, to give moral legitimacy for twisted, immoral organizations and nations. The United Nations is a morally corrupt organization. When they make moral pronouncements, it's like Joseph Goebbels or Adolf Hitler making moral pronouncements about the right of the Aryan people. It's not only uh, it's not only empty; it's worse than empty. It's the advocacy of the opposite of any kind of legitimate concept of rights.
Yeah, and I also want to cover the reporting by the Guardian, who I got this story from. So this is a quote directly from the article. Let me give people the article name is UK ban on Palestine action at odds with international law, says UN rights chief. And in there it said. Ministers proscribed the group under the Terrorism Act 2000 after some of its members broke into military airfield in June and painted two RAF aircraft. The ban means that being a member of Palestine Action or inviting support for it carries a maximum sentence of 14 years in prison. Now, everything there is sort of like kind of right, but it's evading so much thing. It's what is it? Omission, omitting.
Yeah, right. It's
The,
deception by omission.
it's ignoring so many things, like the fact that it's not just the fact that the group broke into the airfield. It's the fact that the group itself supported that action. They posted the video on their social media. They openly bragged about doing this. They openly support these actions. They openly support these terrorist actions. It wasn't just spray painting. They put it. They spray painted inside the engines. That it's. I think somebody mentioned earlier. It was about 7 million pounds of damage. This is an actual damage that every single UK taxpayer is going to have to pay, because this is a government thing. So everybody's going to have to chip in now for this repair. Again, 7 million pounds. And what else did they say? And yeah, just completely ignoring what is actually happening. And I I don't even know what to do with this kind of reporting. This kind of like this is straight up lying. Like this is omission at the level of lying almost. The fact that you mislead so much.
Right. I mean, we can debate the scope of what a government should be able to do with an organization like this, and whether the mere advocacy, to what extent the mere advocacy for this group should be made criminal. I think that's a very valid question, a question of rights. But the saying that going after an organization that engages in criminal activity like this, Palestinian action, and then they say action. This isn't free speech. This is action that hurts people, that damages people, that hurts their property. Okay, that threatens people. Okay, that is, you say that's a violation of international law. That's the violation. Wait. What is this international law thingy? International law is whatever the UN Human Rights Council says it is, whatever the UN might say it is. Well, then now you're asking who? You're asking the dictatorships of the world what they think is morally legitimate. I mean, that's what's so perverse about it. You know, even if there were some, let me put it this way: if there were some point to, and I disagree with this because it's pure sanction of the evil, to having an organization of nations that are morally dubious, so you can prevent world wars and prevent conflicts from around the world. So let's talk. And that's what they normally say. Let's talk. We should open up a dialogue with Russia. We should open up a dialogue with Iran. We should open up a dialogue with North Korea. Okay, I think that's wrong. I think that's inherently immoral, and only the good guys can lose, and only the bad guys can win in a situation where you have a dialogue between good and evil. But let's assume that you think that peace is going to happen. Would you accept the moral pronouncements of that organization as morally legitimate? Well, we've included Russia and China and North Korea and Iran. So, would the moral pronouncements of that organization have any moral legitimacy? And so the question here is, again, it's a philosophical one. You can't just assume that, well, geez, it's the United Nations, therefore it has this magical pixie dust on it that grants moral legitimacy to its pronouncements. That's what needs to be questioned. That's what needs to be questioned. And Great Britain, it's time to wake up. It's time to wake up and define what rights are for yourself. It can't mean throwing rocks, whether it's a right-wing organization or a Palestinian organization or any other kind of organization. It does not, free speech and individual rights do not include the right to violate someone else's rights, to damage their property, to throw rocks at them, to set fires, to cause many millions of pounds worth of damage to an RAF aircraft, to break into a military facility which is there to defend the rights of all Britons. Now, wait a minute here. That can't mean what rights include. So, Britain, you define rights in your law for yourself using the proper terms, and ignore, in fact, denounce as morally illegitimate any claim of some foreign organization, some international law organization that says you're violating individual rights. But you see, it's in a way it's too richly poetic, because now they're facing the same kind of ire that Israel does from morally illegitimate scoundrels claiming moral rights, claiming moral legitimacy in their ethical pronouncements. Britain, get it? My British friends, you're going to wake up and get it now? These are monsters. These are immoral monsters who are making moral pronouncements when you try to defend the rights of Britons.
Somebody says, even if we don't like them, those countries do exist on this planet, and thus we must have a framework to deal with them. Why? Just because some
Why?
savage 100 years ago took over, conquered parts of Arabian Peninsula, now we have to deal with Saudi Arabia. Now we have to make deals with them. No, ignore them. Why should we? Again, this is a compromise on our part. This is a compromise. The purpose of government is the protection of individual rights. To what degree is this helped or encouraged or promoted by engaging with Soviet Union, by engaging with Communist China through the UN? Why is anything there? How does that promote that in any way, shape, or form?
Did we have to engage with Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany? Did we have to engage with Tojo's Japan? Did we have to engage with these dictatorships? Okay, look, a dictatorship is a state of war of the government against its own population. When that inevitably, at some point, if it survives, and somehow, if the West doesn't keep it alive, at some point, that war against its own people will spill out into neighboring nations. Currently, Muslims are at war with Israel. Muslim organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and quasi-governmental organizations like the Houthis, and the government, the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are aggressive dictatorship organizations that rule a people. There's, in fact, talking to them gives them moral legitimacy. Talking to them is what got us into this perpetual war business. Russia is currently now killing Ukrainian civilians. Right now, in Ukraine, they engage in there's a classic case of a dictatorship invading a neighbor because it's a state of war. Russia is a state of war against its own population to some extent, just as China is, just as Iran is. And of course, that means that they would. Another essay that I constantly recommend to people, The Roots of War by Ayn Rand, that you can read in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Dictatorships are the cause of war, not rights respecting nations. There is no need. In fact, it is counterproductive to engage. What you end up doing is you end up sanctioning them. And of course, what usually happens is you end up feeding them, you end up supporting them, you end up economically building them up. And so it was wrong for the United States to engage in any kind of detente and diplomacy with the Soviet Empire. That is what kept the Soviets alive and going as long as they did. You know, it's remarkable when that moral legitimacy was taken from them. When Ronald Reagan says, "You're an evil empire," you know, he was still engaged with them, mind you, but just doing that much, having that much moral backbone, caused the Soviet Empire, in effect, to fall apart. No, every time you engage with them, you support them, you keep them in existence. You know, you say it's a reality. Yeah, well, it's a reality that we, the more civilized nations of the world, should do everything we can to stop, to end, to prevent them. Because, you know, not only are we setting up a security problem for ourselves, look at what happened to Israel, look at what happened to Ukraine, look at what happened in World War II. Of course, by sanctioning your enemy, all you're doing is keeping them alive. And by the way, you're helping them oppress their own people. So you're betraying your own security interests as you're simultaneously helping them oppress their own people. No, we don't have to engage with them. We don't. They are a reality. Question is, how do we deal with that reality? Do we support them? Do we give them moral aid and comfort? No, that would obviously be counterproductive to our security interests, and by the way, to the interests of the people in those countries.
You know, people are saying if you don't engage with them, there's going to be war. Again, I simply disagree with that. The fact is, you can ignore them. I still see no reason why we should deal with China, deal with Iran, deal with Russia in any way. Simply ignore, have if the you know if Trump can rename the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, then he can erase a bunch of nations from the official US map and basically consider that empty land that doesn't exist, metaphysically doesn't exist when United States is concerned, unless they threaten American citizens, unless they actively are posing threat to America, but otherwise ignore them.
If they engage in war, you see, if we don't engage them, there'll be war. Well, that does not follow at all. But insofar as they do engage in war, then of course we respond with overwhelming force and we defeat them thoroughly. That's how you deal with them. No, we don't have to deal with them until they become a direct security threat, but we don't have to deal with them. What? Because they're threatening war? Because they're threatening war, we've got to reward them, sanction them, because they are a threat to international security and there might be worth. Consider your logic out there, questioner. It really doesn't work. So unless we feed the enemy, he will hurt us. Okay, no, wait, slow down. Feeding the enemy will make him stronger. Feeding the enemy will encourage him, and it will not stop wars. It will not stop the invasion of Ukraine. It will not stop the violence against Israel. Prevent October 7th. No, engaging them, giving them legitimacy is what encourages them to do so. And then they'll ask for a ceasefire, in the name of peace, so they can catch their breath and what? Come back and attack again. No. Why on earth do you have to engage with them? There's no reason to engage. Well, they're holding a gun at us. Okay. Well, should they? The moment they do hold a gun to you and start firing that gun, you fire back overwhelmingly. That is the only correct moral response. You do not hand them weapons. You do not feed them in the meantime. You do not give them moral aid and comfort in the meantime. That is absolutely counterproductive to your own security interests. Uh, because someone can beat you up is not a good reason to help them, to say they're morally okay and we need to negotiate with them. No, Negotiations of this kind are always counterproductive. You can engage with countries who for that are morally legitimate. Diplomatic engagement with Great Britain and the United States, Great Britain and the EU, Great Britain and New Zealand. That's one thing. They share values. They have things to trade. They're productive, peaceful nations that simply want to interact in peace. Okay, I can understand engaging with them. I cannot fathom why you would engage with someone who might pose a military threat to you. That can only help them and hurt you. In fact, what you do is you set the moral bar. You say, I'm not going to engage with you so long as you're threatening me in this way. Engaging with you is to legitimize your threat. No, the minute if they are, whoever this questioner is, if they are indeed a threat to us that might start a war, all the more reason to isolate them, all the more reason to denounce them, all the more reason to avoid having any interaction with them. What, you're going to help them, support them? We created the United States is over the last century or so have been masters at creating their own enemies. We propped up Germany. We propped up Russia. We propped up, how many nations do we prop up? If some country has a revolution and they nationalize American or British business interests, oh, well, we rush in to legitimize. Oh, yeah, you're a legitimate country. And rather than saying, no, you stole our property, you're threatening you're threatening force against your neighbors. Therefore, we will not have anything to do with you. That is the only intelligent approach, and that's the safer approach in the long run. It's like feeding the bully. Is what you're saying is that when someone's a bully, feeding them is the correct approach. Giving them moral sanction is the correct approach. No, it isn't. And you're not ending the bullying. You're not ending the threat of bullying.
We have a, well, just quickly, somebody says maybe we should respect in caps lock that nationalization and shouldn't have expected to extract it so much from those countries to begin with. Again, why do those countries have rights to that? Let's say specifically the oil fields in Iran or Persia at the time, they didn't have any right to that. They didn't have. It was the Western companies, it was Western individuals who came, well, first even developed technology to even make
I
use of oil,
know.
who managed the extraction, who found the oil. It took a long time to even found it. Who had the expertise to actually figure out the infrastructure to get it actually working and get it into industry back in the West. Why? Just because some again we are talking about Iran, just because some savages are living around the area around it, why from how do they get the right to that just because they live next to it, when there were people who actually engaged with the world, who actually engaged with reality and made use of it, shaped it to its desire.
Petroleum was sitting under that sand for millennia, and they had no use for it. They had no way to access it. They didn't know its value. It was just sitting there. And what gives a country moral legitimacy, what gives it, and besides, socialism is a moral corruption in itself. Nationalizing the private property as such, I don't care whose it is, some foreigners or some local person's private property. Let's say it was a private Iranian company that had been nationalized. That would be an act of dictatorship in my mind, to nationalize the oil industry and take it from its private developers. You're absolutely right. Who was the one who discovered it? Who was the one who accessed it? Who was the one who took it out of the ground, refined it? Where's the market for this product? This is all beyond what Iran ever could have ever done, found, supported, anyone needed, had a market for. No, in no sense is it, there's no such thing, another wonderful essay by Ayn Rand, collectivized rights. There's no such thing as tribal rights. If I say, we've got a group of people here, Daniel, we really like your computer and your headset and your microphone, and we've decided that we're going to take it from you. And you worked hard to purchase those things, but we, your neighbors, have decided to take that stuff from you. Is that morally legitimate? Is it any different than some thief breaking into your house and stealing it? No, it isn't. And because your neighbors voted to take it from you, doesn't add to the moral legitimacy of the taking it from you, does it? No. And in fact, as you point out, in the case of petroleum and throughout the Arab world, what right do they have to it? They couldn't access it. They didn't know the value of it. They couldn't extract it at first. Now, we teach them how to do so. They start extracting it on a collectivist basis. Consider medieval kings. How are they any different than the kings in the Middle East or the religious theocrats who run Iran? I say, Jesus, we have this religious authority. I'm appointed by God. Notice it's thugs. It's thugs and dictators who will say, I have this, I'm on a mission from God. I have this mystic authority which overrides anybody's individual right to their own labor. I can enslave people, in effect. I have a right to enslave people to my purposes. That's what you're saying. The government has a right to enslave its own people, is what you're apparently saying. And they have a right to steal property developed by other people. They've invited them in to develop this property, and they have a right to just steal what they developed. No, it's theft. I don't care whether it's a robber who does it or some medieval king who claims he's a descendant from some appointed by God or whatever their mystical claim is, or even an election. The fact that most of your neighbors think it's okay to rip you off doesn't make it okay to rip you off. The fact that most people in the South thought, in my country's history, the United States, thought slavery was okay. Let's say that the government of Georgia passed, overwhelmingly 2/3 of the population votes for slavery. Does that make it okay to enslave people? No, it's morally illegitimate to steal from people, to enslave people. No majority vote will grant it magical legitimacy. No claim from God will grant it legitimacy. Well, the religious beliefs of your neighbors are such that they can steal from you, Daniel. Does that grant it legitimacy? No. And you'll notice how frequently they resort to religious type arguments. And frankly, the idea that a majority vote grants something legitimate is a mystical idea. What? Because the community, because the white folk of the South think it's okay to enslave the black people of the American South because they're a minority, that makes it okay. Democracy does not
Whoa, whoa,
magically occur.
James. The Union going to the South to stop slavery, that's imperialism. That's Western
That's
imperialism
Western
coming.
imperialism. Exactly. Exactly. So it's the people who bring comparative freedom, who liberate individuals from being enslaved, ripped off, robbed, stolen from. Because what? Because there's some collectivist tribal rights, because there's some mystical origin to our monarchy, because we're the ones who win in the battle of swords. No, a battle between thugs does not determine legitimacy. A trial by combat, like from the Middle Ages. God will tell us who's the right when you fight to the death, and the winner obviously had God's favor. Does that grant something moral legitimacy? As I say, what you need to do is you need to go back to school and figure out what moral rights are and why someone's labor and property belong to them. Because the option here is individual property rights or some form of slavery or theft. Those are your options.
So I'll just quickly finish it because this is collectivism. So that person says they were trying in effect to free themselves from exploitation by outside nations, mostly by renegotiating the situation on exploiting natural resources. Without those companies there would be nothing to exploit. So
Negotiate.
again, you are completely have this mixed. And again, we are not dealing with some collectivistic societies. We are dealing with individuals who bought the land and who exploited the land, if you want to call it, and they had the right to it. If you buy a house next to me, do I at some point have a right to take it because it's close to me? No, you developed it, you built it. There would be nothing to nationalize for those dictatorships if Western companies didn't build it there. There would be nothing for them to profit from. They wouldn't magically discover how to develop those resources. Because again, when it comes to sort of advancement, when it comes to technological advancements, it only happens in free societies. It only happens in societies where where the thinking of an individual is allowed. This is not something you have anywhere in the Middle East besides Israel.
Yeah,
So
if you
no.
want prosperity for those people, then advocate a free market. You will turn it around, and people and poverty will become a very relative thing, and people will become prosperous and wealthy. The technology of your nation will, I mean, and the way of looking at it, your nation, the people, the individuals in that area will become wealthier because they're free to use their minds and to pursue their own well-being. And through voluntary trade, the entire community of those individuals become wealthier and more prosperous. It is not foreign exploitation that oppressed the Iranians. The question is not where their millennia long poverty came from. The question is, where does development come from? Development comes from the recognition of individual property rights so that people can discover, say, oil, learn how to extract it from the ground, refine it, have a market for it. Now, what were you going to do with this refined oil? You're going to sell it to the power plants and automobiles and ships in developed countries who've got all that technology that they developed through the free market. Now, you can respect individual rights and become a prosperous nation and give the individuals in your country a chance to become successful and happy, or you can be like a tribal chief and say, no, all of this because I'm a descendant from the family of Muhammad. I have some collectivized right to your labor. You are in effect simply my slave, and that's really the option here. What you're saying is that if your neighbors do have a right to gang up on you, Daniel, then what we're saying is that your neighbors really own your life, your effort, your labor, your creative thought. No, I am not a slave to my community. No amount of majority rule, no mystic claim, no battle between thugs will give them any kind of legitimacy or authority when they take it. It's individual property, individually created. And the creators have an absolute right to it. Otherwise, you're saying they are, to some degree and in some form, subject to being ripped off, robbed, enslaved.
We also have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says, James, friends to recognize state of Palestine, but where is that? No such place exists on the map. Yeah, I talked about it yesterday. James, any comments on the French move? It didn't officially happen yet. They want to announce it in September, France recognizing the Palestinian state.
Right. That's evil. That's truly evil to reward the perpetrators of October 7th for perpetrating October 7th. If we just give them more, we just keep legitimizing, this is exactly what we were talking about earlier, this sanction. If we just feed them more, if we're just nicer to them, if we recognize them as a legitimate entity in the wake of their atrocities and brutality, they will stop being aggressors. They will suddenly become rights respecting organizations or nations. No, it does not follow. In fact, what you're doing is you're encouraging the opposite. When you subsidize something, when you sanction something, what you're doing is you're encouraging it, you're fostering it. And so, in the wake of October 7th, France has taken a truly evil position in terms of rewarding, sanctioning, and fostering the atrocities of October 7th. Just say that really clearly. France, if you are to do this, what you will be doing is morally approving of, morally rewarding, materially supporting the people that are engaged in this anti-Semitic, mysticism-based collectivism that's bigoted against the very existence of a Jewish state in the area. That's it. You are rewarding the atrocities of October 7th. It is counterproductive to civilization itself. You are becoming like the very savages you're sanctioning. It's my full-on statement there. They're rewarding evil. They're taking an evil position. And evil to me is not some religiously derived concept from, some mystical religious text. Evil to me means against life on earth, anti-human life, anti-human life. And that is directly what France would be doing. It would be sanctioning the atrocities of October 7th, and there's no other way of putting it.
Well, with that, let me remind people about the Irreplaceable Spark Conference, the conference we are planning later this year, October 25th and 26th in Orange County, California. I will most likely be there. James will be there as well as many other speakers who you have maybe have seen on this channel. You can check out objectivism.co.uk or even go specifically to the speakers page to find out who everybody is going to be there. More people will be announced, so this is it's not a finished list. More people will still be announced. So make sure to check out objectivism.co.uk. James, any last thoughts and where can people find you?
I'm James Stephen. Well, here, the Ayn Rand Center UK, we're continue for years. I've been doing seminars on Dr. Peikoff's lecture courses and written essays and material. But you have to be a paid subscriber to participate. If you find the ideas, the philosophical ideas, for example, that I've been discussing today, interesting, then to really access it and to go deep on it, what you should do is become a paid subscriber of the Ayn Rand Center UK. We have all kinds of, you can get a voice here that you're never going to hear anywhere else. We've got all kinds of philosophical material that gives substance to the kind of opinions you're hearing here. There's a unique voice in the world. So here is where you can find me, Ayn Rand Center UK. I'm also active on Facebook, James Stevens Valiant. I answer questions there almost every day. Please feel free to hit me up.
Somebody asked, is somebody living in the UK, why is your organization called Iron Center UK? Well, we started as a organization. We are still based in London, in United Kingdom, and we started with basically doing talks or sort of meetups around United Kingdom. But then COVID happened, so we moved to YouTube. But we still organize events in UK every now and then. And since I mentioned it, now is a good time to remind people about our mailing list. Whenever we're planning something, whenever event is happening, we always announce it on our mailing list. So link to that is in the chat. And especially if you're in the UK, you might be able to find some events we're planning, usually
What
in
could be
London,
more
but around.
What could be more appropriate than a group of international students of Ayn Rand's philosophy? I mean, it started in a pub, yeah, in London, right? And when the COVID lockdowns happened, there had to take to the computer to continue to communicate. But that opened up a whole worldwide audience. And how much more appropriate it is that the United Kingdom be the seat, the home, and the origin of this wonderful organization that is creating a group of international students, an international movement in favor of reason and individualism and freedom. Yeah, I'm proud to be part of it, even though I'm an American. An American's American, but I'm proud to be part of Ayn Rand Center UK. We're an international group that started in a pub in London. That's right.
Well, with that, thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective. Until then, bye bye.
Be safe.